I'd come back to Elmridge for spring break. Just a week, one of those liminal stretches of time where everything feels vaguely temporary. The town always felt smaller after a few months away, like it had shrunk behind my back. I wasn't expecting much. Just a routine: wake up early, hit the gym, get coffee, walk the same streets I knew like the back of my hand. Nothing had changed, and that was the problem. That first morning, I laced up my sneakers while the sky was still a shade too dark to feel like morning. The air had that early spring bite where you can see your breath even though the sun's coming up. I took the long route through the side streets, habit mostly. That's when I saw it. The ice cream truck. It was just sitting there, dead quiet on Monroe Lane. No lights, no jingle, no kid-chasing energy. The paint was faded, and the decals, melting cartoon characters, were barely hanging onto the chipped metal. It wasn't just that it was an ice cream truck in March. It was the way it sat there, like it didn't belong to the street or even the time of year, like it had been dropped there by mistake. I told myself maybe it broke down, maybe the driver left it overnight and forgot. But even then, I don't know, there was something wrong with how still it was. I remember slowing down just a little, not enough to stop but enough to clock it, and for some reason, I felt like I was being watched. Not in a dramatic way, more like when someone behind you is reading over your shoulder and you can't prove it. I kept running. I didn't look back. I was coming back from the gym a couple of hours later, muscles sore, hoodie damp with sweat, mind already shifting toward coffee and a hot shower. I wasn't even thinking about the truck until I turned onto Monroe again and saw it, still parked in the exact same spot. That's when it really struck me. It hadn't moved an inch, same weird angle against the curb, same slouching presence like it had grown roots overnight. I eased off the gas slightly, not stopping, just slowing, enough to look. That's when I saw him. There was a guy in the driver's seat now. I don't know how I missed him earlier. Maybe he wasn't there the first time. Maybe he was lying low, but now he was upright, facing forward, hands resting on the wheel like he'd been waiting. Gaunt face, patchy beard, skin that looked a little too pale even through the windshield. But it was his stillness that got me. Not the kind of stillness that comes from being asleep or zoned out. This was something else. Intentional. He looked like someone trying very hard not to move. Our eyes met for just a breath, just one of those accidental glances, the kind you give strangers all the time. But this one held. I don't even know if he blinked. I kept driving, but it felt like his stare followed me like a string had been pulled taut between us. I checked my mirrors once, twice. He hadn't moved, not a twitch, and somehow that made it worse. Like he didn't need to move to know I'd seen him. It was sometime after lunch. The sky had that dull, overcast look that made the whole neighborhood feel like it was stuck between two states, too bright for evening, too dim for day. I wasn't thinking about the truck anymore, honestly. Not until I stepped outside to grab the mail and saw it again. It took me a second to register it. I was halfway down the driveway before I noticed the shape at the curb. It wasn't on Monroe this time. It was here, on my street. Just a few houses down. Same truck. I could tell by the faded wrap, one of those cheap sun-warped designs with cartoon popsicles and some long-forgotten company name flaking off the side. Still no music, still no movement, just there. I froze for a second. Not scared exactly, but unsettled. The way you might freeze if you came home and your front door was wide open when you knew you'd locked it. I stood there holding a handful of junk mail and stared. It hadn't done anything, hadn't moved, hadn't even turned on, but it felt closer, like it was narrowing a circle around me. I told myself it could be coincidence. Maybe he just had a route. Maybe he had friends nearby. But it didn't feel random. It felt like it had followed me, like it had decided to get just close enough to see if I'd notice. And what really gnawed at me, what dug its nails in, was the thought that maybe he'd seen me earlier. That maybe when I drove off this morning, he was watching, and maybe now, he knew where I lived. I don't even know what pushed me to think of it. Maybe it was just how still everything had gotten, like the air had thickened. I was pacing the upstairs hallway when it hit me. Calvin's old binoculars. He went through this intense birdwatching phase back in high school. Bought the whole kit, field guides, logbooks, the works. I figured they might still be in the guest room closet. They were. Dusty, but they worked. I pulled the curtain just enough to peer out, crouching behind the window like some idiot in a spy movie. But it didn't feel theatrical. It felt necessary, like I needed to look before I could breathe again. The truck was still there, parked in that too casual way, angled just wrong enough to feel intentional. I zeroed in on the windshield. That's when I saw it. He was watching me too. Binoculars. In his hands. Same kind as mine. Maybe even the same model. And for one sickening second, it felt like we were mirroring each other. Locked in this weird standoff across the street. I don't know if I flinched or if he just sensed it, but the second I focused on him, he dropped them. Fast. Like he'd been caught. Like the illusion had cracked for a second, and he panicked. Then the engine kicked on. Not loud, just this quiet purr as the truck rolled forward. Not fast, almost deliberately slow, like he wanted to make sure I knew it wasn't coincidence anymore. Like he wanted me to see him leave. That was the first time I called the cops. I didn't even have the right words. Just that there was a guy, some guy in an ice cream truck, circling the block in March. It sounded ridiculous as it came out of my mouth. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Because I didn't feel stupid. I felt watched. It had been a couple days since the last time I saw the truck. I almost convinced myself it was over, or at least that it had been some dumb misunderstanding my brain had latched onto. I was out of coffee and a few other things, so I headed over to this tiny grocery store off Bramhall. One of those weird, half-forgotten strip mall setups, always dim inside, half the lights buzzing overhead. It felt like the kind of place time didn't move right in. And that's where it was. The truck, parked near the back of the lot away from everything else, tucked just behind the dumpster like it had slipped in unnoticed. No music, no movement, just sitting there like it had every right to be there. I tried not to stare, but my chest was already tight before I even stepped through the automatic doors. Inside it wasn't busy, just two old women near the frozen foods and a guy stocking shelves. I wandered into the dry goods aisle, and that's when I saw him, or someone, about 2 aisles over, not in a uniform, not behind the wheel, just walking, casual like anyone else. But there was something about the way he moved, too slow, too deliberate, like he was killing time without trying to look like it. Same build, same lank hair. I never let myself get close enough to really check. Something about that felt dangerous. Like if I got too close, I wouldn't be able to lie to myself anymore. So I left, fast. Didn't even finish grabbing what I needed. I remember scanning the lot before I stepped outside, trying to prep myself to see the truck again. But it was gone. LS. No sound, no trace. I checked my mirrors all the way home, and even when I was inside, I kept thinking I heard the crunch of tires on gravel out front. I told myself it was nothing. But that didn't stop me from checking the windows every half hour, until it got dark. I don't even remember falling asleep that night. I'd been on edge since the grocery store, couldn't focus, couldn't settle. Every creak in the house felt heavier than usual. When I did finally sleep, it didn't feel like real rest, just a long blink. And then I heard it, this faint, broken jingle barely there. I couldn't tell if it was real at first. It was the kind of sound that slips into your dreams and then stays behind when you wake up. But it wasn't coming from inside my head. It was outside, hollow, off-key, like it was playing on dying speakers. It stopped for a second, then started again, slower. That's when I noticed the tapping. Soft, steady, like someone pressing their fingernail gently against the glass. Not pounding, not trying to break in, just reminding me they were there. I didn't want to look. Every part of me screamed not to, but I had to. I moved the curtain just enough to see out into the yard. The streetlights were giving off that yellow, sick kind of glow, and for a second I thought maybe I was seeing shadows. But no, he was there, standing right in the middle of the lawn. No truck this time, no movement, just him, still, looking up at the house like he already knew which window was mine. And he wasn't alone. There were two smaller shapes next to him, short, unmoving. human-sized, but just barely. They didn't sway, didn't shift, just stood there like props in a scene I didn't understand. I must have backed away. I don't even remember doing it. I didn't sleep after that, just lay there until the sun came up. And when I finally worked up the nerve to go outside, there was nothing. No prints, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there. But I know what I saw, or at least, I think I do. It got quiet after that night. Almost too quiet. I went a week, maybe two, without seeing the truck. No more weird sounds in the middle of the night. No more tapping. The air even felt different somehow. Less charged. I started to convince myself it was over, that maybe it had all just fizzled out. I eased back into things. I stopped checking out the window every 5 minutes. I stopped scanning parking lots and side streets. I even stopped watching the road on my morning runs. Not because I felt safe, but because I was tired, worn out from constantly bracing for something that never came. Then one morning, over breakfast, my mom brought up this bit of local news, just in passing, not even thinking much of it. 2 kids had gone missing in a town a few miles out. Twins, 6 years old, last seen walking home from school. The kind of story you hear and feel sick about for a second before the world keeps turning. But for me, it didn't. I didn't say anything at the time. I couldn't. I just nodded like I was hearing it for the first time. But the moment she said twins, something inside me locked up. I could feel it in my chest. All I could see were those 2 small shapes from the yard. Frozen, silent, like mannequins, or worse, like kids who had nothing left in them. I keep trying to make sense of it, trying to tell myself I imagined it, that it was dark, that I was sleep deprived, that it could have been anything. But no matter how I twist it, I end up right back there, at the window, looking down, wondering why any of this happened, why it felt so personal, like I was picked. That truck didn't just happen to show up on my street. I don't care what anyone says, it found me, and I don't think it's done. I don't even remember what exactly I was hoping for when I moved to Briar Falls. Maybe I thought a change of scenery would fix something. Maybe I convinced myself that a quieter place, somewhere without all the familiar corners and memories, might finally give me room to breathe. But looking back now, I don't think I had a plan. I just needed out of that apartment, out of the suffocating routines, out of the shared spaces that weren't really mine anymore. We'd been together 5 years, half a decade of shared coffee mugs and grocery lists and conversations that used to mean something, and then suddenly, nothing. Just silence, and not the peaceful kind. It was the kind that presses in on your chest, makes the air feel too still. Every object in that apartment reminded me of her, like even the walls had been paying attention while I hadn't. So I packed up and found this place in Briar Falls. 2 stories, old wood floors, slightly musty but cheap. It was on a dead-end street where nothing ever seemed to happen, which at the time sounded like exactly what I needed. I thought maybe the quiet would help, but it didn't. Most nights, I just drifted upstairs to my room, collapsed onto the couch, and let whatever movie was streaming carry the weight of the evening. I wasn't really watching any of it, just letting sound fill the space where my thoughts kept echoing too loudly. I'd play the same kind of action flicks over and over, not because I liked them, but because they didn't ask anything of me. Just noise, just distraction. And even then, it didn't help much. Something about that house, it never let me fully tune out. That Saturday night wasn't any different from the ones before it. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I think it had started drizzling sometime after dinner. Not a real storm, just enough rain to make everything feel a little heavier, like the air itself was tired. I closed the blinds and let the gray flicker of the TV light wash over the room, picked some random horror movie to stream, one of those low-budget ones with a generic title and a thumbnail that looked like it had been made in 5 minutes. Exactly the kind of mindless thing I could ignore while pretending to pay attention. I don't even remember what the movie was about. Haunted hospital, maybe? Or a creepy doll? They all blur together when you're not really watching. but I do remember the sound. This sharp, metallic hit that kept coming back. At first, I assumed it was part of the movie. Some background noise or clumsy audio cue, but it kept repeating every minute or so, same rhythm, same pitch. It didn't sync with anything happening on screen. It wasn't building suspense or leading into a scare. It was just there, detached, off. I paused the movie, expecting the sound to stop, but it didn't. Just kept going, steady and exact like a metronome. That's when I figured it had to be my speakers. Maybe some weird internal feedback, or the rain messing with something outside. I muted everything. Still, the sound came. That same knock, metallic and cold, like someone tapping a wrench against a pipe. Not urgent, not loud, but deliberate. It was the first time I noticed how thin the walls were in that house. Or maybe it was just the first time I realized I wasn't entirely alone in the quiet. I paused the movie at some point. Don't even remember the reason anymore. Bathroom, maybe. Or just a moment where I zoned out completely. The screen froze on some forgettable scene and the room went still for a second. That kind of stillness where you suddenly realize how quiet everything actually is, even with the rain tapping gently at the windows. And then it came again. That same metallic clang. Not loud enough to make me jump, but sharp, clean, like a deliberate strike against something solid and hollow. The TV wasn't playing anymore. The sound wasn't coming from there. It felt too real, too present to be anything coming from the speakers. I remember just standing there, not moving. I wasn't scared yet. It was more like my brain lagged behind what was happening. Like when you wake up from a dream and try to figure out what part was real. For a second I convinced myself maybe it was just in my head, an echo of the sound that had already been playing for the last hour. Something my brain had latched onto, looping it. But then it came again. Same tone, same rhythm, not muffled, not distant, somewhere in the house, somewhere too close. That's when it clicked, in this slow, sick way, like my mind trying to catch up to something my body already knew. This sound, this thing that had been repeating over and over, had nothing to do with the movie. It wasn't electronic, it wasn't ambient, it was physical, real, and it was inside the house. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew it. Somewhere behind a wall or under the floor or just past the edge of where I could see, something was making that sound. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Some obvious answer, something that would just snap into place and explain the noise away. But I went through every room like an idiot anyway. Living room, kitchen, both bedrooms. Opened every closet, checked under the beds like I was 12 years old again, expecting some kind of monster to reach out and grab my ankle. Of course, everything looked exactly how I left it. Same stacks of unopened mail on the counter, same unwashed dishes in the sink, but it didn't feel the same. Something was off, like the air itself had shifted just slightly, the way the shadows sat in the corners, the way the floor creaked under my steps. It was all familiar but wrong, and I couldn't explain why. Then I made it to the garage. The door was barely cracked, just a sliver, like it hadn't been fully shut, not open just enough to notice if you were looking right at it. I know for a fact I lock that door every night. It's muscle memory at this point, part of the routine. Lights off, check the back door, then lock the garage. I stared at it for a long second, like maybe I could will it shut again with just enough disbelief. But I walked over slow and pushed it open with the back of my hand. The garage was dark, still, nothing obviously out of place, but I couldn't shake it. I crouched down near the latch, and that's when I saw them, tiny scuff marks, barely there. Could have been anything, could have always been there, but they looked fresh, like someone had forced the lock, or tried to. I stood up too fast, heart already pounding, brain already racing ahead. I tried to talk myself down, tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there. But deep down I already knew. Whatever made that sound wasn't just in the walls, it was closer than that. I remember standing there for a second too long, still trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that nothing was actually wrong, that maybe I'd left the garage door like that myself and just forgot, that the noise was something explainable. Pipes, maybe, or the wind knocking something around. I almost believed it. But then I went back upstairs and looked out the bedroom window. It was that gray part of the evening where everything's still visible but fading. The lawn was quiet, damp from the earlier rain. But one of the deck chairs, the plastic ones that came with the house, wasn't where it should have been. It was sitting out in the middle of the yard, like someone had dragged it there and just left it. And beside it was this kid. I say kid because he was small. Couldn't have been older than 16, 17 maybe. Hoodie up, face mostly shadowed, just standing there, still, not fidgeting or pacing, just frozen, like he was waiting for something. He had this pipe in his hand, thin, long, metal. He didn't look up, just slowly raised the pipe and tapped it against the chair. That same metallic clang I'd been hearing all night. It echoed across the yard, and I swear, even though his head didn't move, I knew he was aware of me, watching him. It was like he could feel it, like he'd been waiting for me to look. And then, without warning, he lifted the pipe again and slammed it against the chair. Hard, louder this time. Not just a sound, a message, a reply. I ducked back from the window, heart hammering. I didn't want to look again. I didn't want to see what else he'd do. But worse than that, I didn't want to know what he wanted. There was this second, just a flash, where I almost went outside. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Maybe I genuinely believed the kid was in trouble. Maybe that part of me, the part that still wanted to believe people are mostly good, kicked in. I even had my hand on the back door handle, but something about it all just felt off. If he needed help, why wouldn't he come to the door? Why just stand in the yard like that, doing nothing? Why the pipe, the silence, the way he moved only when I was watching? None of it made sense. None of it felt normal. Instead of opening the door, I stepped to the side toward the small window just left of it. It's one of those narrow ones, half covered by a curtain. I pulled it back and looked down toward the deck. That's when I saw them. Two figures crouched low beneath the wooden slats, right beside the door, dressed head to toe in black, hoods up, gloves on, completely still, not shifting, not breathing, just crouching there like they'd been waiting. Like they knew someone might come to the door, like they were counting on it. I didn't scream, didn't run, I just froze. I don't even remember backing away. 1 second I was at the window, the next I was across the room, pressed to the wall like a kid hiding from a monster under the bed. But these weren't monsters. They were people, real, solid, intentional, and that was somehow worse, because monsters play by rules. But people do things you can't always explain. The rest of that night doesn't come to me in order. It's all chopped up, like someone took the memory and dropped it on the floor. But some parts are too sharp to forget. I remember locking myself in the upstairs bathroom, the only room with a solid door and no windows. I kept trying to dial 911, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't even hold the phone right. My thumb kept slipping. I don't even know if the call went through. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Then there was this noise, glass breaking somewhere below, loud, close. A door slamming hard, like someone kicking it shut, and then the sound of steps. Not heavy stomping, not rushed, just footsteps. Careful, coming up the stairs. Every creak in those steps made my heart stop. Then it went quiet, and then just once, there was this heavy thud against the bathroom door. Not a full hit, not like someone trying to break it down. Just one, deliberate knock, like they were letting me know they could. I remember yelling something about the police. I don't know what I said exactly, just whatever I could think of. And then, nothing. No voices, no retreating footsteps, just silence. They never came through the door. They never said a word. After that, I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours, but when I finally opened the door, the house was empty. Nothing taken, no obvious damage except for the shattered glass. I still don't understand it. I keep thinking about that kid, standing in the yard tapping that pipe. Was he part of it? A lookout? A lure? Or just a kid playing some messed up game? I don't know. I probably never will. All I know is I check the locks now, every night. I checked the garage door twice, sometimes 3 times. It happened on a Thursday, I think. Or maybe a Wednesday. The days blur together when your life runs on follow-ups and callbacks. All I remember for sure is that it was late, later than any work call should have come in. I was already in bed, barely paying attention to whatever was on my screen, just scrolling like I always do, half watching old car review clips on mute, waiting for sleep to take over. Then my phone lit up. It was an unknown number. That alone didn't mean much. My job means I deal with a lot of first contacts, referrals, inquiries passed along through vague text messages. I usually pick up, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. That's just part of the hustle. But something about this one, I just let it ring. I can't really explain it. It wasn't fear or anything like that. More like a weird resistance. Like my body already knew it was better not to answer. It didn't leave a voicemail. That's what made it feel like nothing. Harmless. But a few minutes later, the same number came through again. This time I didn't hesitate. I sat up and answered it. There was static. Not the regular kind you get when someone's in a dead zone or driving through a tunnel. This was broken, erratic, almost physical. Like the sound of something that had been scraped up and reassembled wrong. I was about to hang up when I caught something underneath it. Just a flicker of sound I recognized. My voice, not like an echo, but something I'd actually said earlier that day, during a completely normal conversation. I froze. Every muscle in my body just stopped responding for a second. I can't explain the feeling, just that it was wrong. Familiar in a way that felt invasive, like someone had followed me home without moving. It happened again the very next night. I wish I could say I was surprised. I wasn't. Just tense. The kind of tension that creeps in behind your eyes and settles in your jaw before you even know what you're reacting to. Another unknown number. Different this time. Not the one from the night before, but the same uneasy feeling hit before I even answered, like I already knew where this was going. I picked up. Of course I did. Part of me was hoping it was just a coincidence, some strange hiccup in the world of robocalls and misdials. But the second I heard the static, that hope dropped straight through the floor. It was worse this time. Not as broken or distant, almost like the recording had been cleaned up, filtered. The static came in waves now, letting more of the audio slip through. And then there it was again. My voice. Not just a line this time, but a whole stretch of conversation. Something from earlier that afternoon. I remembered the call vaguely. It was routine, forgettable. But hearing it like this, in that warped playback, it made it feel sinister. There was no other voice on the recording. No sign of the client I'd spoken to. Just me, talking into the void. I kept listening, waiting for something, anything to change. But the pattern held. Only my words, only my side of the call thrown back at me like I was the only one who had ever been on the line. I didn't hang up right away. I just sat there, phone to my ear, trying to convince myself there was some explanation. A glitch, a weird bug, maybe even a prank. But nothing about it felt digital. It felt deliberate, like someone had listened, picked it apart, and handed it back to me piece by piece. There's this coffee place I sometimes go to, not too close to the office, not far enough to be suspicious. It's where I hide on days when I don't want to make small talk with coworkers or pretend I slept well. I was there the morning after the second call, trying to reset, or maybe just pretend everything was normal. The guy in front of me looked like anyone. Neutral jacket, earbuds, the kind of presence you forget immediately. He ordered his drink, stood there while they made it. And then, just before walking off, he turned halfway and looked at me. No smile, no weird expression, just casual like passing weather. And he said it. The phrase word for word. Something I'd said the day before during a client call, something very specific, something I wouldn't normally say. I remembered saying it because I remember thinking afterward that it was a little out of character, too casual for the context. But I had brushed it off. Hearing it come out of his mouth, it was like being struck in the back of the head. Not loud, just wrong. It felt wrong. He didn't wait for a reaction. Just turned back, took his coffee when they called his name, and walked out like nothing happened. Like it hadn't happened at all. I didn't get my coffee. I don't even remember ordering. I kept replaying what he'd said, the way he said it, like it had no weight, like it didn't belong to me. And the worst part was how certain I was that no one else could have possibly heard that call, not unless they were listening to something they shouldn't be. It became a pattern. Every night, like clockwork, the phone would ring, different numbers every time, different recordings, but the same voice. Mine, always mine. Snippets of the day, things I'd said barely hours earlier, cut up, looped back at me like echoes in a place I didn't recognize anymore. By the third night, I stopped answering in my apartment. I started taking the calls in my car, parked on some dim side street where I could look in every direction. I thought maybe if I could see everything, then nothing could sneak up on me. But it didn't help. It only made things feel more fragile, smaller. I started doing things without really deciding to. Checking locks 3-4 times before bed, moving chairs in front of doors, shoving a dresser in front of the bedroom door, like that would actually stop anything. I turned lights on in rooms I didn't even use, just to break up the shadows. I couldn't stand the quiet anymore, so I left the TV on at night, but the static between shows started sounding too much like the calls. Work became impossible. I'd zone out in meetings, forget entire conversations, forget what I was even supposed to be doing. Every face looked unfamiliar, even the ones I knew. I stopped answering calls altogether, but that didn't stop them from coming. At some point, I stopped being able to tell if I was actually being watched, or if the idea had just rooted itself too deeply. The fear felt the same either way. The only difference was the direction it came from, outside or inside. I still don't know which is worse. I don't even remember deciding to go. I just ended up at the precinct one morning like muscle memory had dragged me there. It felt stupid the second I walked in, trying to explain something that didn't even make full sense in my own head. I sat on this plastic chair across from a young officer who looked more tired than suspicious. Still, I talked. I tried to keep it simple. Just the facts, the phone calls, the recordings, how it was always my voice. But as I spoke, I could hear it unraveling. The words sounded hollow. I kept stopping mid-sentence, second-guessing how I was saying things, worrying that I sounded off. I was trying so hard not to sound like my mother used to when things were bad, when she'd say things that didn't follow any clear logic but made perfect sense in her head. The officer nodded the whole time, pen tapping quietly against his notepad. He asked for the numbers, said they'd check them out, but his tone changed halfway through, softer, less official. The way people talk to someone they don't want to upset. I could feel the shift, and it made something twist in my chest. That invisible line between concern and condescension. I didn't even blame him, really. What was I expecting? There were no threats, no crimes, just weird calls and me spiraling. He offered a number for someone I could talk to, someone trained. I pocketed the card without really looking at it. I knew I wouldn't call. It wasn't going to help. I wasn't having a breakdown. I wasn't imagining this. I just didn't know how to prove any of it. And that was somehow worse, because if no one else could see it, maybe it meant it wasn't real. But it felt real. It felt more real than anything else. Changing my number felt like some kind of reset button, a desperate attempt to claw back some control. It was a logistical nightmare. My whole life, professionally at least, was tied to that number. Clients, colleagues, contacts. I spent days playing catch-up, but for a while it felt like it had worked. A few days of silence. No calls, no static. I told myself it was over, but the quiet didn't feel like relief. It felt like a held breath, like something crouching just out of frame. The call came 3 days in. New number, of course. I stared at it ringing for so long it nearly went to voicemail. I didn't pick up because I was curious. I picked up because I was afraid not to, because I was tired of not knowing. Same static, different shape, less like a broken signal now, and more like something watching me pretend not to be afraid. And then I started talking. I don't know why. Words just came out, rambling nonsense at first. But then something deeper, things I hadn't told anyone, not even myself, really. I don't remember everything I said, but I know how it felt, like I was unspooling. I said my address, my full name. I think I even apologized. I wish I could say I didn't mean it, or that I was out of it, not thinking clearly. But the truth is, in that moment, it felt like I needed to do it. Like giving myself over might finally make the noise stop. Maybe that's the part I can't forgive myself for. Or maybe it's the fact that, deep down, I'm still not sure what I was asking for. That night is hard to talk about. I don't even remember most of it in sequence, just flashes. I sat at the kitchen table for what must have been hours. The gun was there, just sitting in front of me. I never thought I'd be that person, the kind who actually prepares for something like that. But I was. I didn't feel dramatic or panicked, just hollow, like I was waiting to be told what to do next. I kept expecting something to happen. A knock, a window breaking, a shadow moving just a little too deliberately. Something, anything. I thought if I could just confront whatever this was, whoever it was, maybe I could end it. I don't know what ending I imagined. Something definite, something final, but nothing came. And then the silence stuck. No more calls, no more static, no weird playback of my own voice. Just quiet. That should have been the part where I got better. But instead, that's when everything really fell apart. Because there was nothing to fight anymore. Just the aftermath. Just me sitting in the pieces of whatever that was, trying to make them fit into something that made sense. I moved out. I didn't even take most of my things. I left the gun behind. I took time off work and told people I was dealing with health stuff, which I guess wasn't a lie. I tried therapy, meds. I even went to church a few times, though I didn't believe in anything. But the worst part, I still don't know what any of it was. I don't know why it happened. I don't know why it stopped. And the not knowing, that's what's unbearable. Because if it starts again, I honestly don't know if I'd survive it twice.